What's up, party people? I'm back. This week I talked to David Pepose, who just announced his new book, 10 Ton Titan Terrier. We talk about that and a lot more. Check it out. Guys, it's my pleasure to welcome back David Pepose. David, thank you for coming on again. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be back on the show and yeah, excited to talk comics with you today.
Absolutely, me too. And listen, like you have been, like I said on the little pre-show, you have been a busy man. You've last time we talked, I think it was maybe like a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago, and you've been straight up just rocking it, man. And I gotta say, I'm very happy for your success, and I think it's fantastic. And I'm excited to see like all the new stuff that you're announcing.
I really appreciate it. I feel really lucky with the books I've been able to write lately,
Mhm.
and I don't get to sleep much these days, but I always say this still beats honest labor. So thank you
Mhm.
so much for the kind words.
No, absolutely. So I believe the last time we talked, you may have had one or two Marvel books out. And ever since then, now it's a litany. Oh, I looked at your Marvel bibliography today and I was like, Jesus Christ, he's done so much stuff. Now, did they approach you or did you approach them?
It was a little column A and a little column B.
Okay.
With all of my indie work, I
Mhm.
would always email different editors and just say, hey, look, here's a new project that I had. And I think it was during like the height of the early pandemic.
Mhm.
Uh, I was doing a lot of work. I was doing the OZ. I had
Yeah.
Scout's Honor coming up through Aftershock. I had a
Mhm.
lot of anthology work.
Yeah.
And so I kept emailing Marvel and particularly CB Cebulski and Tom Brevoort saying, hey,
Mhm.
like, I got more and more and more stuff. And I think finally they were like, okay, like this guy's clearly not going away. Maybe we should give him a shot. And
Yeah.
so that wound up turning into my run on Savage Avengers, which
Mhm.
was such a treat, such a fun first project at Marvel. And then that turned into Moon Knight City of the Dead, my miniseries over there, my
Mhm.
Punisher miniseries, and now Cable, Love, and Chrome, which
Yeah.
issue three, by the time this interview drops, issue three will have just come out for that. And so yeah, it's been really wonderful working over there. I've worked primarily
Mhm.
with Tom as my editor, and
Yeah.
he's a terrific editor. He's got a lot of integrity, and his storytelling instincts are like laser guided. And I
Mhm.
really appreciate and admire that he doesn't treat books like a statistic. He
Right.
really does. He holds my feet to the fire to make sure that
Mhm.
like we're kind of pushing this thing as best as humanly
Mhm.
possible. And so I really appreciate that. And it's been really fun doing work over there, and as well as the other publishers that have been kind
Mhm.
enough to pick me up. My work at Dynamite with Space Ghost and the upcoming Captain Planet, and
Sure.
Ad Cave, who I'm kicking off Speed Racer with
Mhm.
every comic book day. And so yeah, it's been and creator owned work, more of which we'll be able to talk about later on today.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been just a whirlwind. But I
Mhm.
think every project has its own unique kind of vibe and flavor and voice to it. And for me, somebody who gets restless easily, that's like the perfect
Mhm.
job. You're really able to kind of find the emotional core in each story, and they all hit different,
Mhm.
and that's very satisfying for me as a writer and a storyteller.
I think it's fantastic. I look at your body of work and I always get a kick out of and like listen, we're huge comic fans. I think everybody who's ever been on the
Yeah,
show is just like a giant comic fan, you know? Um and I look at your body of work and I'm like this looks like it's so much fun because you're still doing stuff for a lot of publishers, you know?
yeah,
Like for example, I really enjoyed The Devil That Wears My Face that you did with Mad Cave,
yeah,
like fantastic book. And I kind of want to ask you, like, apart from the superhero stuff and apart from the big IP stuff that you're doing,
yeah.
is there going to be any more horror stuff coming out from you?
Uh, Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
Alex Cormack and I are actually slowly getting the ball rolling on our
Mm-hmm.
next project together. I don't have a specific date for that in mind yet.
Yeah.
There's still paperwork that's
Hmm.
being ironed out, but Alex and I already know what we're going to work on together next.
That's
And
awesome.
yeah, he's Alex is one of the most tremendous collaborators I've ever had. I love
Hmm.
working with him. So I told him pretty much for six straight issues on Double Doors My Face,
Hmm.
we're going to work on something else, and I pitched him something around. New York or around San Diego Comic-Con last year, and he was very into it, and a publisher was very into it, and so I hope to have more to share in the months to come.
Hmm.
But more horror coming because it's such a fun genre and one that I didn't expect to enjoy writing so
Hmm.
much, but I really do. So yeah, I've got a number of horror ideas that I really want to work my way through
Hmm.
in the coming years. So stay tuned.
I appreciate that because I think what struck me most about that book for me is I'm a big horror guy. I
Yeah.
always find that it's very hard to do religious horror well in comics, because it's always just like it's always The Exorcist you know what I mean? It's just
Yeah,
always the
yeah,
same thing or like a nutty nun or something. But Devil Wears
yeah.
My Face, pretty fantastic. I recommend it. Anybody who's listening who wants a solid, good, well-written horror comic that looks great, pick that up from Mad Cave.
Thank you.
Um,
It's Face Off meets The Exorcist, in case you're wondering what the high concept is. And
mm.
Alex Cormack is such an amazingly talented artist that just seeing his pages alone is really worth the price of admission.
From what I've gathered, Mad Cave is an excellent place to just pitch your
It
ideas and
really
work at.
Yeah, no, Mark really sets the tone at Mad Cave in such
Mhm.
a wonderful and positive way. I
Mhm.
don't think I've ever worked at a publisher that goes to the mat for its
Mhm.
creators quite as hard as Mad Cave does, and I
Mhm.
think that all comes from Mark, and he's been such a tremendous supporter and champion of me and my work
Mhm.
from my very earliest books that I love working at Mad Cave, and I will continue to be working there for as long as they'll
Mhm.
have me.
Did he pitch you, or did they pitch you Speed Racer, or was that on you?
Yeah, so Speed
Uh,
Racer was super fun in that after I worked on Devil Wears My Face
mhm.
and me and Mad Cave, we really liked working together and working again with Mike Martz and Christina
Mhm.
Harrington, who they were my editors on Scouts Honor. Mike was actually one of my supervisors at my very first internship
Mhm.
at DC back in the day. So I go way back with both of them. And so I was doing a signing at San Diego Comic-Con
Mhm.
for the Where's My Face for Mad Cave and Chaz Pangburn, my editor on Speed Racer. He and I have been in contact quite a bit since The Devil Wears
Mhm.
My Face. He's been trying to find like the right fit for a licensed book from me. And we've talked about a couple of different IPs, but either the timing didn't work or I didn't really know the IP well enough
Mhm.
to have a good angle on it. And he pulls me aside at San Diego and he says, "So listen, uh, we've had a really good experience working with Tatsunoko
Mhm.
Productions. Gotcha, man. And it's been, I think, a win-win on both sides. And so we're actually picking up the rights to Speed Racer. And I thought
Mhm.
you would be a good fit for that. Would you be interested?" And, anybody who knows me knows that I love chase sequences, car
Okay.
chase in
Mhm.
particular, but you see it in all sorts of books. Both volumes of Spencer and Locke.
Yeah.
The OZ and Scouts Honor have elements of that. The Devil That Wears My Face has a carriage chase.
Mhm.
Even Moon Knight City of the Dead has kind of an aerial dogfight chase in it. So
Yeah.
I love doing that. And I was just like, oh, a series where I could write 15 issues and then we added on a free comic book day issue of car chases. Like, yeah, yeah. Like I'm not going to get to do that very often. And the name and cachet culturally of Speed Racer, I was just like, oh, that's one of those offers like you can't turn down. And so I remember I was just thinking about it and thinking about it. And
Mhm.
Mad Cave had a creator event that night,
Mhm.
and I went there and I cornered Chaz and I said, "Chaz, I've been thinking about this all day. Like, yes, count me in." And so it's been really wonderful. I actually just turned in another issue for that about an hour ago. I'm really excited with how that book is coming together. And I think it really is kind of a return to my roots in a certain way,
Mhm.
dating back to like Spencer and Locke and going to the chapel and Scouts Honor, in that I love writing superheroes, but I do think sometimes having the powers can sometimes serve as a crutch, even a
Right.
crutch
Right. Right.
even having
Yeah.
a hero. And so, writing Speed Racer, this very flesh and blood character who he doesn't really have a superpower, it's just that his ability to drive and the
Mhm.
various that his car might have. I think there's something really engaging. You really tap into the emotions more.
Mhm.
Um, and so I've had a lot of fun on this book. Like I said, we have a long runway, 15 issues plus our free comic book day issue. And
That's awesome.
similar to my run on Space Ghost. It's brand new continuity, so you don't
Hmm.
have to watch the original cartoon to get on board. And it's a lot of done in ones and done in twos. So you can jump in and jump out. You'll really get your money's worth
Hmm.
from this series. But it's Rocky in a race car. It's how does Speed go from winning illegal back alley street races to becoming a champion of Formula X racing, and
Hmm.
all the twists and turns that happen along the way. And I'm really excited to be working with artist David Tinto on this book. You might know him from Commanders in Crisis over at
Hmm.
Image, work on Ultraman over at Marvel. He and I worked on a story in Avengers Unlimited together a few years back, and I'm so taken with his work. And David has only grown by leaps and bounds since I worked with him last. His free comic book day issue is going to knock your socks off, and I feel fully confident that as the series goes on, he's going to continue to just keep rocking it.
I'm super excited about it. And listen, like I feel like it's always tough, and it's got to be a little nerve-wracking to not to like pile on any kind of anxiety on you, but it's got to be a little nerve-wracking to handle like an IP like that. You know, like Space Ghost is one thing. Space Ghost, I personally feel like there's a lot of room because there's not a lot of stuff. You know,
Yeah.
it's a very like, it's Racer X, Speed Racer, what does he do? You know? But there's a lot of room to move. Now with Space Ghost, was that your pitch, or was that IDW saying like, "Hey, we're looking for somebody to write Space Ghost"?
Yeah, so Space Ghost was
Mhm.
another one of those, I've been emailing editors for
Yeah.
so long. And so Nick Barucci over at Dynamite,
Hmm.
I've known him since my earliest days as a comics journalist. I've known him, I think he and I go back now like 15 years.
Hmm.
uh Actually more at this point. And so every time I had a new book, I'd let Nick know. And so it was New York Comic Con, not last year but the previous year. Joe Ryban, my editor in the book, who I can't say enough good things about Joe.
Hmm.
He emailed me shortly before New York and was like, hey, are you going to be at the show? Could we talk? And they had just announced at the show that they had done this big new licensing agreement with Warner Brothers Discovery with books like Thundercats and Powerpuff Girls and Space Ghost and Johnny Quest.
Hmm.
And so Joe said, "Listen, we're big fans of what you did on Moon Knight City of the Dead, and we're excited to hear about what you got coming for Punisher. Do you have any interest in Space Ghost?" And the timing was actually perfect. I had
Hmm.
just wrapped up my Punisher mini series, and so I was kind of figuring out what my schedule was going to be after that. And I was like, they similar to Mad Cave, Dynamite offered me a long runway on the book. They
Hmm.
said, "Then would you want to do 12 issues in an annual?" And in the current marketplace, that's a pretty big commitment,
Yeah,
especially
yeah.
from a non-big two publisher. And as I thought about it, I was like, Space Coast really does have all these ingredients for success. Like it's
Hmm.
a character who, it's sort of like equal parts like Batman and the Mandalorian.
Right.
Uh, you get the superhero crime elements, but you also get the heightened sci-fi space opera of it all. And but for me, the thing that really kind of struck me as I was watching those old cartoons to kind of like make a decision was how prominent Jan and Jace were.
Yeah.
And that really kind of like the light bulb went off, and that became like the emotional spine of the whole series. Is we've seen Space Ghost have like a standalone origin story. I read Joe
Hmm.
Kelly and Ariel Olivetti's work when I was a college intern, and thinking, oh, like Space Ghost is a serious hero. He's not just coast to coast. But watching those cartoons, I was like, oh, nobody's really dug into how do these twins wind up in Space Ghost's orbit, and how do they go from being kind of these runaways to his trusted partners in
Hmm.
crime? And so for me, I kind of saw it as like Dr. Grant and Tim and Lex from Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
That kind of character arc of this guy who is gruff and rough around the edges, becoming like the ultimate single dad in space. And so that book has been so wonderful, so fun to work on. Issue 11 just came out, the beginning of our Council of Doom three-parter. But yeah, it's been a real joy to work with Jonathan Lau and Andrew Dalhouse and Taylor Esposito on that book. And to see the response to it has been nothing short of incredible.
Yeah.
It was a leap of faith. I wasn't sure if this would catch on, and I credit Tom Brevoort at Marvel that
Hmm.
a lot of things that he really has instilled in me over the years, particularly on our Punisher miniseries. I was able to take those lessons and put them into practice and
Hmm.
refine them further. on Space Ghost, doing the Dunnan ones, figuring out what the emotional core is, always making sure that the heroes are doing heroic stuff.
Mhm.
They're saving civilians. It's not just punching out a bad guy. That has been a real treat and a real gift. And I think that book in particular, I'm able to do all the fun superhero stuff
Mhm.
I do, but I don't have to do any of the negotiation of a shared universe.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah.
and so I do get to have my cake and eat it too. And I couldn't be happier with how that series has been received.
It's fantastic. Like I'm a fan. I like it a lot. And I picked up that first issue and I was like, oh man, he's kicking ass all over the place, you know? Which, you know what? At the end of the day, I feel like I'm a simple comic fan, you know, as much as I love super complex
Yeah,
stories and I can read Grant Morrison Invisibles all day, right?
sure.
I just want Space Ghost to kick ass, you know, like I feel like that's one of those things, and it
Yeah,
happened. Now, let me ask you, how this is this is like a fanboy question.
sure.
Have you been privy to the original Alex Ross art at all, or is it just like he did a bunch
Oh,
of stuff and like it's in the
yeah,
wind, you know?
yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, no, the answer is no.
Okay.
That, because Alex did all those covers for the
Yeah.
DC run that was like 20 years ago, and so it's like it's a different publisher, it's a
Hmm.
different generation, really. And of course, like if somebody said, "Hey, Alex Ross is interested in doing a cover for Space Ghost,"
Yeah.
you better believe I would jump on that. But yeah, I haven't been privy to any. I don't
Yeah.
even know where geographically any of that is. But me being in Los Angeles and Dynamite being based in New Jersey, like already, like I've never seen the Dynamite offices for that matter.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. It's
So
the world we live in, you know.
yeah, yeah. So, but no, I mean, I know that Alex Ross is a big Space Ghost fan, and
Hmm.
I it is my one regret that he scratched that itch. Because boy, what I wouldn't do
Yeah.
to have a cover from him. But we were lucky enough to get a cover from Joe Quesada,
Yeah.
which was wonderful. Not only am I a huge fan of Joe stylistically, but I really respect the hell out of him for
Hmm.
being such a tireless ambassador for an enthusiastic ambassador for
Yeah.
comics as a medium. So that was really special, and I think yeah, I think seeing the kind of Murderers Row cover talent on this book,
They're
it's
all
been
amazing. Yeah.
yeah, it's been it is really a Murderers Row.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been great.
That's incredible. Now let's chat the same thing. IDW Captain Planet's coming out soon. Um, Talk to me about that. Was that another one where they were like, "Hey, we got Captain Planet. What do you think?" Or were you like, "I think I can do
No,
Captain Planet"?
that one. So, San Diego Comic Con. San Diego Comic Con last year was very eventful for me.
Yeah. Very
In
busy.
that I saw the press release that Dynamite sent out saying that they were
Hmm.
expanding their Warner Brothers line and that Captain Planet was one of the licenses they had picked
Hmm.
up. Um, I was at BarCon when I saw that, and I immediately emailed Nick Barucci and Joe Rybank, and I said, "Is somebody on this book? Because if not, you have to give it to me."
Uh,
I've been pitching Captain Planet around the comics industry for 10 years.
wow.
Literally every publisher, every time I got like would talk to an editor, if they did licensed work, I would always say, if you get the rights to Captain Planet, you have to let me know.
Hmm.
Because I have felt for 10 years that I was like, oh, this is ripe for a reboot. Like,
Hmm.
I understand that sometimes that cartoon gets a bad rap for either being a product of its time or being maybe less than subtle. But I'd say, firstly, reality's gotten a lot less subtle in recent years.
Oh
But
yeah.
also, I think the building blocks are all there. It's
Hmm.
inherently multicultural and diverse in a way that I don't think we've really seen since Giant Size X-Men.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah.
It's so timely, dealing with environmental disaster
Hmm.
and the human greed that fuels it. But also, pop culture's caught up with it. Like
Yeah.
you can kind of inject bits of like the X-Men as sort of these, underdogs in the
Hmm.
run suddenly granted extraordinary powers, but also like Avatar: The Last Airbender with like the visually dynamic elemental bending,
Hmm.
and I was just like, yeah, that's something. And also, just the world has shifted a lot since 1990.
For sure. Yeah.
And so, updating all that to reflect how geopolitics looks today, I there's a reason I've been carrying the torch for this for so long.
Yeah.
And it's a book that sometimes feels a little scary in terms of how timely it is these days.
Hmm.
But I feel like Captain Planet, kind of similar to Space Ghost, is a character who's been overlooked for a long time, but he's got all these ingredients for success. And I think particularly today, in the year 2025, I think Captain Planet is one of those characters that he's a hero that really meets today's moment. Uh,
100%.
him and the Planeteers. And so, yeah, I'm working with artist Amon
Mhm.
Casalos on that. What a sensational find. Like seriously, like I knew Jonathan Lau over at Space Ghost. I've known for a long time that he was
Mhm.
sensational. I wasn't familiar with Amon's work, but he's got a style that's like a little Gary Frank and a little Steve Dillon.
Very cool.
Um, but like little bits like Doug Mahnke and Frank Whiteley in there too. And he does this amazing larger than life artwork, but also uh he does this amazing larger than life artwork, but also what was I going to say? The acting. The acting is so just beautiful. I posted a little panel on my Twitter today,
Uh-huh.
like Linka and Wheeler in the subway together, and like Amon
Mhm.
gets it. So he's not a household name, but I really hope to change that with Captain Planet because he's come out of the gate absolutely swinging on this book, and I couldn't be more grateful to have such an amazing collaborator who really
Mhm.
believes this book and its message and its potential.
That's really cool. Listen, I'm super excited. I think a lot of people, a lot of folks I've talked to, like, I'm in my mid 40s. My buddies who collect comics are in their mid 40s. And, like a lot of them just, they're not, I'm a weekly book guy. I feel like I can't never, it's like cocaine to me. I can't let it go.
Yeah.
But a lot of my friends are just like, they'll dip their toe in sometimes. And then I feel like the magic, say what you want about like big IPs and everything, but the magic of those IPs is that feeling you had when you were a kid when you saw them. And I know for a
Sure.
fact, like two separate friends that don't really like each other, they are like will pick up like they're like, I can't wait for this Captain Planet book. you know
That's
Much,
great to hear.
yeah.
I think you kind of hit the nail on the head in that, I think yes, there's the nostalgia elements to it, but
Mhm.
at least in the case on Space Ghost, and I'm feeling hopeful for the same thing for Speed Racer and Captain Planet is that, we've had a lot of people who are like, I have know nothing about Space Ghost, and I've never
Wow.
read the book, and I think the reason for that is, it's accessible. You don't
Hmm.
have to have read anything to get on board. All you need to do is pick up issue one. But I think it's people they love comics. Like I don't think the love of comics has gone away. If anything,
No.
I think hunger has increased. I think what has happened is that in the age of um, superheroes being ubiquitous in popular culture and spoiler culture and the
Yeah.
internet, Twitter is throwing out its own theories and Reddit and what have you, is that fans I think are getting a little jaded. I think they're working themselves
Hmm.
up lather trying to anticipate a story rather than enjoying it.
Yes.
And and it's easy to do so when these are characters that have been so thoroughly mined for, decades on end.
Right.
Something like Space Ghost, something like Captain Planet, something like Speed Racer, they feel a little bit more like virgin territory. You're
Hmm.
able to tell stories that the fans they can't anticipate it. And so it kind of
Right.
forces them to sort of sit there and enjoy the story for the story and not thinking, how does this fit into continuity in a million different other books? Or I can guess that it's going to be this thing, or are they going to draw from this obscure bit of continuity?
Hmm.
You don't have to worry about that noise when you're reading one of these books, whether it's
Yeah.
Transformers or Ninja Turtles or Thundercats or the books that I'm writing. And so we're able to have write I feel like I
Hmm.
don't feel like I write that differently for say, Space Ghost than I did my Punisher miniseries. But I think people without that weight of expectation of how's this going to affect a whole superhero universe and how's this going to tie into a bunch of other stuff. And
Yeah.
people aren't trying to guess the story ahead of the story. They're able to, I think, be a little bit more present. So I think that's why people are enjoying these books. It feels a little bit more accessible and a little bit more unpredictable.
Like it drives me up a wall. Like the exact thing you said about how a lot of, I'm gonna use air quotes here, a lot of fans they just turn into analysts. Like I don't appreciate as a lifelong fan, I think it's the most dumb thing you could do to say like, A, I could do this better. What is this person doing? And well, like you just said, like they're trying to predict the outcome of a story that has not been published yet.
Well, I think I do think it comes from a place of love. And that's why anytime I get frustrated with it, I remember it is coming from a place we all love this
Hmm.
stuff.
Oh
All
yeah.
in a way, like I'm always chasing the feeling I had when I was 4 years old and read Amazing Spider-Man 346 for the first
Hmm.
time. And I think every fan who's been at this long enough feels the same way. They're always
Yeah.
chasing the high of that first book. And so yeah, that idea of like, oh, you love it so much that like suddenly you're not just reading the comics. Now you're reading the news about the comics. Now you're not just reading the news about the comics. You're speculating about the comics. And that's why it all comes back to there is that hunger.
Yeah.
And I think it's easier to scratch that particular itch of like trying to guess the stories
Hmm.
and also, social media is like I think an inherently cynical place that
Yeah.
feeds that instills that kind of feeling.
Hmm.
Um, and it's one of those things. There are structural hurdles to getting comics.
Yeah.
You don't. I mean, I'm not the first person to say that. Like, the pre-order system is like I understand why it is the way it is, but it's
Hmm.
also it's you wish there was a better alternative because it's very challenging
Yeah. Yeah.
for
Yeah.
civilians to do. And then some people like maybe they don't want to support Amazon or they don't like the Kindle reader, and I don't blame them there either. And and I don't I the people who decide I'm going to go to my shop or I'm going to pay digitally rather than go out and pirate it.
Hmm.
I really respect those people.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
um, uh, but I think it makes it a lot easier to scratch that fandom itch
Hmm.
in the community. And sometimes the community, God love them, wonderful as individuals. When you put enough people in a group, it's easy to kind of doom
Yeah.
spiral and get cynical and compete for hot takes. Um and so yeah, it's kind of nice, working on these books like Space Ghost and Captain Planet
Hmm.
and Speed Racer, where you're able to enjoy all the trappings of a superhero book and all the archetypes and the morality plays and the character drama and the
Hmm.
metaphor behind all of it. But yeah, like you're a little bit out of that sort of rat race of like, well, this version of Wolverine versus, this other version of Wolverine and
Hmm.
like you know, that does kind of drain the fun out of it a little bit.
It does. It does 100%. Like I worked at a comic shop in my early 20s, going to college full time, and I was
And you're
like,
still
it
here.
was
Congratulations.
thank God, it was a full-time comic shop, full-time college, and it was honestly like it was the probably the best job I ever had, right? My boss was a lunatic, it was the best. But these older guys, like, just to kind of like piggyback on what you just said, these older guys would come in and they would angrily buy
Yeah.
Amazing Spider-Man, for example, right? They would angrily buy Amazing Spider-Man and then go, "This is garbage. I love Spider-Man. It's not like it was in the 60s." And me and my buddy, who I'm still very close to this day, we'd look at each other and be like, "Yeah, dude, no shit." Like it's like
Yeah. It,
2003, man.
and there's so many things that on the outside look counterintuitive, but when you're in
Mhm.
the inside, you realize why it goes that way.
Yeah.
And yeah, like, you're it's not competing, but you've
Mhm.
got 60 years of backstory for some of these characters,
Yeah, yeah.
some of them even more than that. And so, you try telling a new story in that context,
Yeah.
and sometimes, there are publishers who might say, hey, listen, we want to do for example, we want to introduce a new legacy Punisher, and
Mhm.
so like, okay, like, you take those assignments at face value and in good faith, and you say like, okay, like we can do something new.
Yeah.
But like also like that's not on anybody's like bingo card,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
I don't know if anybody's out there like pitching saying, hey, listen, this character that you have, I don't want to use that character. I want to use that name and do a totally different thing with that thing.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's uh yeah, it's just one of those, I've heard people for years be like, "Oh, hey, like, why don't you just like adapt, this comic like panel for panel as like an animated thing or as a movie?" And
Mhm.
you know, that's the only time that I get a little depressed is I'm just like, those already exist in the same
Right.
way that,
Yeah.
I remember when Space Coast was announced, there were people
Mhm.
who were saying, "Oh, why isn't this coast to coast?" And my thinking is, but coast to coast already exists,
Right.
they've done such a pitch perfect job, and I, I don't think Dynamite or Warner Brothers would be asking me to write the book if they wanted coast to coast. But
Right.
moreover, um, that already exists. Like, you don't need more of that. Why not do
Mhm.
something new with it? And so, uh, yeah, I think change can be hard. And like I said, it's
Yeah.
all driven and like we're chasing after that same feeling from when we started. And so there's that
Yeah.
inertia that brings everything back to center. And so we can get resistant in the face of that change. But I do think change is good. And of course, not every curveball is going to work. Like,
Mhm.
that's just baseball, but I think there are things, there are twists and turns, just to throw out a few. Um, you see the Ultimates line,
Yeah.
you see the
Yeah.
Absolute line. I just read Absolute Superman 5 and thought it was such a tremendous, tremendous book. I never thought that I would be so interested in Krypton you know.
It's a good book. It's oddly like I'm gonna say oddly, but it's fantastic. Like I don't know if you know Jason Aaron. I don't know Jason Aaron,
Yeah,
but like I think his writing style when he's hyper focused on a singular character is unbelievable.
yeah, so like stuff like that, all new Venom. I love that
Mhm.
book. That book's super fun.
Yeah.
Charles Soule's first issue of Carnage, I thought was terrific.
Yeah.
That's a character I'd love to write someday. So like there is still room. Mark Waid and Chris Samnee, their Daredevil
Oh my
run was
God.
very against the grain, and it's a high watermark for the characters. So
Absolutely.
Dan Slott on Silver Surfer, very different from the cosmic Jim Starlin-esque kind of stories.
Mhm.
So there is Peter David on X Factor,
Yeah.
doing the
Yeah.
PI noir thing, Immortal Iron Fist. So there is room
Oh
for
my
these
God. Yeah.
unique takes on these characters. And I think while sometimes there's like people, gnash their teeth at it, that those books wind up being the coolest and most memorable books of the line. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's fun kind of being able to do that sort of, that polishing, and sort of saying what's the new twist that
Yeah.
we can throw on this while honoring the core concepts of the character. And so yeah, I think that's something I've been really doing a lot of lately. And it's been really fun.
That's amazing. I'm going to ask you a question as a fan, like as a
Sure.
comic book fan. You quickly mentioned Daredevil, the Samney and Wade run, right?
Yeah.
Um, I don't know if is your wife a comic book fan also?
No, she's my North Star though. She's the one who I don't take assignments anymore unless she's into it because
Smart.
for me it's I want these things to be accessible,
Mhm.
like ultimately I think of things of what's going to be on the table, at a convention. And so, when I'm meeting fans at conventions, they're not necessarily Wednesday Warriors. But I want to have a book that I'm like, hey, if you're not a comic fan, give this a shot.
Yeah.
Maybe I can make you one.
Yeah.
And so, my wife is I wouldn't have a writing career if I hadn't met her. But that scene in 300 where like Leonidas turns to his wife before he kicks that guy in the pit.
Mm,
That's me before I turn in a script. Like just today I turned in a script for Speed Racer and I asked my wife, I was like, can you read this just to make sure this like makes sense to you as a civilian? And it's really served me well in that
hmm.
like it's so easy in this business to get like, razzle dazzled by like the fireworks and like
Yes.
all
Yeah.
the hardcore nerd stuff. And that's
Yeah.
great. That's the icing on the cake, but you still need a cake that's like solid and
Yeah.
satisfying and something that feels universal and emotional
Hmm.
and character driven. And my wife is really good at helping me zero in on that stuff. So, anyway, sorry, that was a tangent. Go on. What
No,
was
no,
your
no,
question?
no. That was an amazing tangent, and I totally relate to that. Like, it's funny that you mentioned 300 because I use that as a reference as well. My wife is a fiery Greek woman, so like, believe me, like I know that scene by like it's amazing, and like she's
Yeah.
also in my regard too in my life. She's my North Star too. She knows to the extent that I will say that she knows what is good for me in the regard that won't let my brain spill out my ear. You know what I mean? Like that
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
thing. I understand exactly what you're saying. My question was,
Yeah,
as a Daredevil fan, and again, like, not that my wife is semi into comics, like, she likes a good story, right? So I'll put big two books in her hand sometimes, and she'll be like, oh, that was really good. Like Dark Knight Returns, for example, like, how could you not love it? But
yeah,
I was saying this to her not too long ago when they announced the new Daredevil series. And I was like, and I want to ask, and this is the first time I've asked another comic book fan about this.
sure.
I go, everybody thinks Spidey's the guy for Marvel, and he is. But for the last 25 years, Daredevil's the guy.
Hmm.
Just
That's an
because
interesting.
of the pedigree of the creative teams on the Daredevil books that have pretty much been like 100% right. Kevin Smith, Brubaker, Bendis,
Yeah,
Wade,
Charles Soule, Wade. Yeah,
Salad Ahmed right now. Like everybody's like
yeah.
firing on all pistons with that book.
That's a book that I'm probably cursing myself saying it. Like,
Mhm.
I don't know what I would ever write on Daredevil, because you hit the nail on the head that that book has always been the prestige book since the days of like Frank Miller,
Right.
where everybody's trying to live up to that, and then you're trying
Hmm.
to live up to Bendis and Brubaker and Wade, and it's just like that is a book that I think
Hmm.
tends to bring in really top caliber talent. And I think it's because Matt Murdock is such an interesting, complex character,
Hmm.
down to the core concept of like, oh, he's a devil who's fighting on the side of the angels,
Hmm.
and he's a lawyer who's a vigilante, but also he's the blind man who can see the world in such an intricate and detailed way. And so there's a lot of contradictions to a character like that I think is very interesting, textured, and appealing. I don't know if I would necessarily, I don't know if I would subscribe to the fact that he's the guy of Marvel, because I think for me,
Yeah.
my metric, it's the concept, and so
Hmm.
I'm Team Spidey all the way, just
Yeah.
because great power, great responsibility. Like he's the guy who lifts up the machine on his back when
Yeah.
he's got nothing in the tank. But Daredevil is such a fascinating character. And I will say, I want to give it a shout out because I do think people that maybe not didn't necessarily. I've seen mixed things on the internet, and I highly
Hmm.
disagree. I saw Daredevil Born Again, and I really liked the first two episodes, particularly the opening. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of people have misunderstood that intro,
Hmm.
where they're like, oh, like the CGI, like, oh, it's like, why is it pulled back so much? And this doesn't feel like a normal superhero fight. And for me, and granted, I don't know what the rest of the series will look like, so I don't know if they'll circle back on that or not. But for
Yeah.
me, I really like the idea of a supervillain attack being seen as like a mass casualty event. Where you see
Sure.
shootings at music festivals or in nightclubs, and it's terror. It's nothing romanticized
Right.
about it. It's
Right.
nothing like, oh, flashy continuity. It's horrible. It's blood.
Hmm.
It's brutality. It's like people screaming, and it's not just like, oh, one person dies and that's it. It's like people are getting picked off one by one, and there's chaos, and
Yeah.
a lot of tension and emotion. And I remember seeing that and being like, I mean, I haven't been able to stop thinking about it.
Hmm.
And I've thought about that intro a lot and thought it was
Yeah.
such an interesting and effective way to start that series and really ground it in the real world, and give Matt a place to claw himself back from. So
Yeah.
I was very impressed with it, and I think that does speak to kind of the appeal of somebody like Matt Murdock. Is
Hmm.
he is a character that's so textured and nuanced and contradictory that there are many different stories and story avenues that you can
Hmm.
take with him. Yeah, I'd love to write that character someday. My dad actually is an eye doctor, and
Hmm.
so he has given people their sight back, and I think that
That's
would
really
be an
cool.
interesting perspective to write from. Um, but yeah, cool character.
Hmm.
I hope to be a lot more talented before, if I ever got offered the keys to that kingdom. But every time I say something like that, I wind up writing one of those stories like 2 months later. It happened to
Uh,
me on Fantastic Four and on Hulk. So uh We'll see.
We'll
We'll
put it
see if
out
I've
there.
cursed myself.
We'll put it out there. We'll put it out there in the universe. Hopefully, like you'll get.
Manifest for me.
I think you'd write a good Daredevil. You know, like again, like listen to how much we can bloviate about that character, and that was the point I was trying to make to my
Yeah.
wife, where it's like, listen, it's Spider-Man 100% all day, every day, but Daredevil may be the most curated guy on the Marvel roster as far as creative teams
Yeah.
and weighty themes like the hopelessness in the face of Catholic guilt while being a vigilante and like doing these, it's very fascinating stuff. But let's move on from the trauma and the sad stuff of Daredevil. Listen, I also loved the first couple episodes. I thought they were great. I don't understand why the internet took such a huge dump on them. Um,
It's the
ta-
internet. That's the app.
it's the
Yeah,
internet.
we talked about it. We know exactly why the
Yeah,
internet took a
it's the
dump
internet.
on it.
And you know,
It's self-fulfilling.
you also correct me if I'm wrong here, but like you don't strike me as a guy that gets a lot of flack in his comments on on like X or whatever, you know?
I curate
Mhm.
with the block button from time to time. I try not to feed that.
Yeah.
Like every so often, there'll be some rude stuff. And boy, I launched with Legacy Punisher. There were
Mhm.
times where my mentions were not a happy place.
Yeah.
Um, but I think for me, like I just try to remember that
Mhm.
I'm a fan first
Yeah.
and foremost.
Yeah.
Third generation comics reader, baby. Like it's one of those things. I don't come to this as like I don't feel like I'm slumming it from another industry,
Right.
like
Yeah.
this is I worked really hard to be able to get to this place. And so, I'm a true believer first and foremost. And so I try to give a
Mhm.
lot of grace and a lot of latitude as best I can, but also, knowing that like I am a firm believer that like comic creators are human beings and shouldn't have to tolerate like,
Yeah.
online abuse from strangers.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I've been very fortunate, and I think some of that is just the privilege of being a straight white guy, is
Mhm.
that, like if I was a woman on the internet, if I was a person of color on the internet, if I was a member of the LGBT community on the internet, I'd be getting like exponentially more abuse
Which
than
is
anything.
sad, you know.
It's sad, and I think that speaks to a whole range of flaws in both
Yeah.
our fandom and our industry and our society at
Mhm.
large. Um, but anyway, yes, I haven't gotten off with too much flack. But anyway, I'm sorry, I interrupted. What was your question?
No, that was the statement that you don't really get like a lot of that vitriol online, that I've seen a lot because like like I'm up to date, like I've through this show I've become friends with a lot of creators and it's amazing and I love it. But then like I'll text somebody randomly and be like, "Yo, how could you deal with that? Like that's insane. That would drive me up like that would, like that kind of thing makes me nuts." Um let's continue here.
Yeah,
So, any can I ask this?
yeah,
Any DC stuff that you would like to work on or have been approached with? Because
boy.
again, you're a busy guy. You've worked
Yeah,
for everybody.
I'd love to do some stuff over at
Mhm.
DC. I mean, I got my start there as an intern.
Yeah.
My very first industry job. Yeah, there's a
What
bunch.
year was that, by the way?
That was 2008. So I was working
Okay.
on Batman RIP and Final
Hmm.
Crisis and Green Lantern Secret Origin and a little bit leading into Blackest Night.
Hmm.
Um, Supergirl Adventures in the Eighth Grade. There are a few others off the top of my head, but yeah, for me, I would love to do stuff over there. Suicide Squad, I would love to do something with the
Oh
Suicide.
man, yeah.
The Flash is another character I
Mhm.
really love. Shazam is one.
I'm gonna interrupt you real quick. Knowing your writing style, I feel like your Suicide Squad would be more akin to the John Ostrander run.
I would take that.
Yeah.
That's a lovely
Yeah.
compliment. That would be super fun. I've never written
Hmm.
like a team before, and well, I guess there's the Council of Doom. I've written them, but like I have
Hmm.
never written like a villain centric book before, and
Hmm.
I think that could be interesting. The Flash, Superman, is a really fun one. I think it's funny when I was getting my start in the
Hmm.
this or well, even before I got my start in the business, when I was like teaching myself how to write and all that.
Hmm.
Um, I had a moment that I was feeling, and I'm sure you felt this way too.
Mhm.
Sometimes you have moments where you're really vibing on a whole bunch of stuff, and then you have, it kind of recedes a bit, and then you're not vibe. You're like desperately trying to find like a handful of books you vibe on to like
Mhm.
grow. And DC was doing the new 52, and it was a period of that I wasn't really vibing on. And so I thought to myself, okay, if you are committed to doing 52 books, so I came up with 52 pitches.
Uh,
Basically saying if I had to curate this line with, and granted, I was young and dumb and hadn't written a book myself.
mhm.
But it really kind of helped me figure out how to like, world build and figure out how do you connect these
Yeah.
characters. I had a really cool tie between like Firestorm and Green Lantern, for
Okay.
example. And so those are really, those are all really fun. But yeah, I would love to do some stuff at DC. We've talked a little bit over there. We haven't quite found the right thing yet. But yeah, I would love to do some work over there. I think they're doing fantastic stuff. I think the Absolute line is tremendous, but I think
Yeah.
also, you see stuff up. Batman Dark Patterns. I've told Dan Waters this multiple
Mhm.
times, but I'll say it in a podcast. I think it's the best damn Batman book on the stands. It's so interesting
Yeah.
that Dan and Hayden Sherman, who is a wonderfully, tremendously talented artist, they're doing really cool stuff. It's
Yeah.
like a David Fincher 7 version,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
and Gotham in particular, and I think it speaks to the post Pattinson Batman crowd. And so yeah, there's it's a cool universe. I think there's a lot of fun that can be done there. But yeah, I don't know. I will say the thing about, at least in my experience at Marvel, is there are certain things that you say like you want to write. That's cool and all, but like you often get surprised. Savage
Yeah.
Avenger I never expected to write, and that's been one of the
Mhm.
most fun books of my whole career. There is a certain something about being surprised and then sort of being like, okay, like rewind the clock a little bit. How do
Yeah.
I, come up with something that feels viable and feels like a big swing, but still feels like me? And so, yeah, call me DC. Surprise me.
I enjoy the Savage Avengers run, especially after like the Jerry Duggan run was it ended up being the top of my stack every time it came out, you know?
Yeah,
And then when you took over, same thing. It was like it carried that spirit of that original run, which I thought was great. And that was a book I put into everybody's hand where it's
thank
like you don't need to know a lot. You just read it, you know? I think and
yeah,
it's that's tough with I think the big two books, you know, because like to say like you don't need to know a lot and there's like six and DC's even like history that is close to 100 years old. You know, like what are you gonna do here? Now let's wrap it up a little bit. Now I heard a little birdie told me that something is happening, a new thing that you're working on. Would you
yeah,
care to elaborate?
yeah. Well, first, I'm gonna send you something in your chats.
Okay.
So that way you can kind of get a little something something what this is.
And again, whoever's listening, this is not pre-planned. David mentioned this before we started, and I said I don't want to know anything until we start talking about it. So let's see.
Let me see. Hold on. I'm digging it out of my folder so
Sure.
we.
Hey, listen, I'm excited. I'm
So
excited.
so you are actually once this thing clears through the chat, you will see.
Mm,
Um so yes.
all right.
So
Let's see what we
uh
got here.
for those who
Oh
know me,
wow.
you might know that I've written some darker books in the past.
Yeah.
This book Spencer and Locke was a detective crime story.
This looks
The
awesome, by the
OZ,
way.
thank you.
This looks
And
effing awesome. And the title is effing awesome too.
the OZ was like post-apocalyptic
Yeah.
fantasy, Scout's Honor, Savage Avengers, The
Mm,
Punish, The Devil That Wears My Face being a bleak horror book. And so for me, I've
mm,
always thought that I'm missing a food group here. And that
mm.
is every time I go to conventions and I have Spencer and Locke on my table, it's always an 8-year-old trying to buy that book. And
Okay.
I have to unfortunately let them down by saying
Hmm.
that this book is a hard R rating.
Yeah.
And so I'm really excited. By the time this episode goes up, we will have just made the announcement publicly, is that I'm writing my first sort of all ages action adventure story, a book called 10 Ton Titan Terrier, which is coming out through Paper Cuts this October. I'm working with artist Ornella Greco. And this book, the way that I've been describing it is it's Pokemon meets the Iron Giant. It's a meteor crashes into Earth, and it's got a bunch of kaiju eggs, but also
Mhm.
an alien battle suit. And the only creature on Earth capable of turning the suit on is an 11-inch tall terrier. So it is the story of a
Amazing.
scientist and his
Mhm.
dog stopping a kaiju invasion with a 10-ton alien battle suit. And so uh, this is a book that Ornella Greco and I have been working on for years.
Mhm.
I've actually been I started writing this book pre-pandemic. So it's been in the works
Wow.
for a very long time. It was inspired by my terrier, Holly, who uh, she was diagnosed with melanoma the summer before COVID broke out. And so as I was taking her to her radiation appointments and I felt so powerless to help her, I said, I don't know if my dog's going to survive, but I can at least make her
Mhm.
immortal. And so she's the star of this book. It's been a real
Yeah.
passion project, a real labor of love. And so when Mad Cave and its paper cuts in print, we're looking to expand. I mentioned this book, and Mike Martz, again, a real champion of me and my work. He immediately said, "I love this book. I love this art. Let's go for it." And so, yeah, this is going to be a standalone graphic novel. So you only have to buy the one thing. But for me, I wanted to make sure that this is something that, readers of all ages could get into.
Mhm.
If you're reading, or if you're watching, I don't know, Dragon Ball Z or Sailor Moon or Avatar: The Last Airbender or Power Rangers, it's sort
Yeah.
of, there's no blood or gore. It's action and adventure. But yeah, it's kind of like an age-appropriate Pacific Rim. And fun for giant robot fans and dog lovers of all ages. So I'm really excited for that book to come out. You're actually the first person I've talked to about this book, so
Thank you,
thank you for
David.
giving me the platform for that.
Well, thank you for letting me be the first person. And also, the name is amazing. 10 Ton Titan Terrier. I'm very excited about this. This looks so cool. And no joke, like, not to blow smoke or anything, I have four god kids. They're all getting this because they're all of reading age and also the extra nephew who just turned 10. So, like, they're
Yeah,
all getting 10 Ton Titan Terrier when it comes out. That looks awesome, man. That's really cool. You like, how does that feel?
yeah, it's
Mm,
it's hard to describe.
mm,
But when you and I are talking about it, it's a week before this book has been announced, and so it's a strange feeling.
mm,
This was There are certain creator-owned projects of mine that I'm very stubborn about, that
mm,
I'm like, this will get made, whether I have to self-publish it, whether I have to self-finance it. It does your heart a level of good to get it out there in the world. And I think
yeah.
for me, our dog Holly she was so sweet. She was so lovely. She was my
Mm,
favorite dog. And my wife and I took her in her last few years of life. And, she was there from the beginning of my writing career. And so, and it broke our hearts when she passed, literally like a week and a half before COVID shut everything down.
yeah.
Holly knew when to make her exit. Um,
Mm,
but I think the fact that I can kind of make her immortal, I can bring her back, I can kind of show the world what just a loving and stubborn and territorial and personality filled dog she was. So writing a book like that really does
yeah.
good, and I can't say enough good things about working with Ornella. She is such a tremendous artist. Most people aren't aware of her work on
Mm,
Picard's Academy over at IDW
mm,
or Total Suplex at the Heart. Um, she's so amazing. And she's been such an amazingly gracious and talented collaborator to work with. So it's this book has been something that I've wanted to write for many, many years. And so I'm so it feels simultaneously like a weight off my chest, and just a real sense of accomplishment that this is going to see the light of day.
I think it's gonna be a hit, to be honest with you. I think it's
I
gonna be a hit. I think it's gonna be a hit, man. Like look at like people love dogs. Like weird, and then like the reason I said that I'm gonna give it to all my god kids because everybody's a dog person, you know.
Yeah.
And I got one guy that's a cat guy, but everybody else is a dog person.
Well, if we do a volume two, maybe we'll get some cats in there.
Mhm.
But yeah, I just like I said, I this has been the missing food group for me is that I wanted to make sure that I had something. I have young nieces and nephews that even Space Ghost, I'd be like, you're a little young for that.
Yeah.
Speed Racer, they might be up for that. But this, I'm like, I have no problem giving this to my 10-year-old nephew. I have no problem giving
Mhm.
this to my 7-year-old niece. It's yeah, I think it's one of those things that I'm a big believer in there's always room to build a bigger table.
Yeah.
And I wanted to make sure that our younger readers, the ones who they're the future of this industry, that I had something to
Mhm.
tide them over until they're old enough to read my other stuff.
Comic books, man, the best.
Yeah.
And you're a hustler too, man. Like every time I see you at a convention, you're slanging it, man, like left and right. It's the best. I love that attitude. It's so awesome. Do you want to leave anybody? Do you want to leave people with anything before we shut this down?
Yeah, well, sure. I've got a lot of books on rotation
Mhm.
that you can pre-order through your local comic shop. Cable Love and Chrome, which is a 5-issue miniseries. Issue 3 will have just come out by the time this recording goes live. You can still pre-order issues 4 and 5. Space Ghost. We've got our issue 12 will be coming out soon-ish. And then we've got a gap month before our annual, which is sort of our big finale of our Council of
Mhm.
Doom storyline. But stay tuned. There might be some fun news we can share very soon after that. And then Captain Planet, definitely pre-order that. That's been a really fun one. And Speed Racer, which kicks off on Free Comic Book Day. And then finally, 10 Ton Titan Terrier, which comes out in October. Tell your local comic shop, bookstore, library, what have you, that you want it. But yes, get all these books, add them to your pull lists. Keep my puppy Ruby fed in kibble. Um, but no, thank you so much for having me with this. I really appreciate you giving me the time to talk.
Absolutely. Let's talk when Ten Ton Titan Terrier comes out. Let's chat a couple weeks after it gets released.
Sure.
Cool. Awesome, man. Thank you.
Thank you.
David's awesome, and that book is gonna rock. I can't wait for that to come out. Comic books this week, guys. Holy shit! DC is killing it with that Absolute line. Absolute Batman #6 rocked. Absolute Flash #1 threw me for a loop. Detective has been solid. New Gods, Nightwing, Superman, Days of Lex Luthor finally came out. Very cool stuff this week. You got Bug Wars 2 also. That first issue, Jason Aaron. Excellent, killed it, great book. New GI Joe also, go pick that up. Crush Depth #1, go pick that up. We had DB Andrew on the show not too long ago talking about it. I hope you guys get it. And the new Conan the Barbarian. Speaking of Conan the Barbarian, did you guys see that Frazetta Girls Conan action figure that's coming out soon? I believe it's coming out in June and it's up for pre-order now. You can check it out here. I'm not an affiliate, but it's a cool figure, so just check it out. Guys, that's it for me. We'll be back soon with another interview. We're going to do some more fun stuff. As always, you can see me talk about wrestling with Andrew Zarian on Tuesdays with Fightful's Beyond the Bell and on Fridays with Matt Men Podcast. I love you all. See you soon. Hit the subscribe link. Enjoy. Spread the word about comic books. I love you all. Goodbye. Mwah.